Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam
Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Enam Kanvandam Maravindadalaya Taksham Bharavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandar Agom Hikamaniya Vishesha Shobha
Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Asa Sakalen Driya Priti Manti Pasyanti Panti Kayanti Jiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadhu Jala Vigrahasya Govindam
Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham
I wanted to invoke the blessings of the Vaishnavis and all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, that we can humbly hear something about a very glorious Vaishnavi and find within our heart some spark that will ignite into a very blazing fire of devotional desire that will keep us very solidly on the path of devotional service of Bhakti Yoga. And I will begin with a briefly reading and offering a letter from His Holiness Guru Raj Swami. And he'd written it to me, but with the idea that I could share this letter. So he wrote, "My dear Malati, please accept my humble obeisances, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. I wish to express to you and to all concerned with Yamuna Devi's legacy how important I feel it is that her association be made available in tangible ways for all times. She was and is an integral part of Srila Prabhupada's mission and service to his Guru Maharaj and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. To remember and glorify her is to remember and glorify Srila Prabhupada. Yamuna Devi was a beautiful soul, a divine servant of Srila Prabhupada, his mission and his Lord's. She was a mentor and guide and friend to many of us. In her passing, our appreciation for and understanding of her may increase, just as people's appreciation for and understanding of Srila Prabhupada is increasing. I feel it would be part of our purification, individually and collectively, to serve her in service to Srila Prabhupada by tactfully and tastefully making her association and mercy available to others in various tangible, sustainable ways." So what he's referring to is a shrine or a bhajan kutir, some sort of samadhi, where there would be a place where people could actually go and have her association in that way. And that was His Holiness Guru Raj Maharaj. And the next one is a very beautiful letter that was from Dina Dayadri. Dina Tarni, the two Dinas. So it's very interesting that Yamuna and Dina Tarni had served together at Srila Prabhupada's order. That he told them that you should remain together throughout your lives serving Krishna. So they did that. And you can imagine if you're with somebody for over 30 some odd years, almost 40 years in service, that there is an attachment. That this attachment, because it was built through the channel of devotional service, was not a mundane attachment. It was a very deep attachment to service of Guru and Krishna. And it was their life and soul. And they shared that same mood with others very freely. So, having this person you most closely associated with in service to Krishna, can imagine how shocking that was to her heart. But she, being a devotee, can feel that pain of separation and at the same time have a very deep analytical understanding. So she wrote, "This morning I was reminded of something I wanted to share. About a month ago, and this means a month before her actual departure, Yamuna had an episode where she felt she was going to leave her body at that time. We went to the temple, and meaning the temple in their home. And with me sitting on the floor and she on the daybed, she began to slowly chant, Gauranga Volite Habe Pulaka Sharir, Hari Hari Volite Nayana Bhavir. Over and over for 2 hours we chanted this prayer, and somehow she remembered the whole prayer, even though it was not one we regularly chanted. Later, after the episode ended, I asked her why she was chanting that bhajan, and she replied she did not know, but it was drawing itself out of her heart. Of course, everything is there in that prayer. The desire for the perfection of chanting, the desire for the mercy of Lord Nityananda, and the desire for understanding Vaishnava literature, and consummately the desire to purify the mind of all material anxieties and desires, thus being able to truly understand what is Vrindavan and the love of Radha and Krishna. It reminded me how ready and prepared in every way Yamuna was for her imminent departure because of her dedication and commitment to the practice of Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada speaks of this in the purport of verse 8.6 in the Bhagavad Gita. She quotes that here. Of course, one's thoughts, and we should listen carefully and consider this. Of course, one's thoughts during the course of one's lifetime accumulates to influence one's thoughts at the moment of death. So this life creates one's next life. If in one's present life one lives in the modes of goodness and always thinks of Krishna, it is possible for one to remember Krishna at the end of one's life. That will help one be transferred to the transcendental nature of Krishna. Transferred to the transcendental nature of Krishna. If in one's present life one remembers Krishna at the end, absorbed in Krishna's service, then his next body will be transcendental, spiritual, not material. Therefore, the chanting of Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare
is the best process for successfully changing one's state of being at the end of one's life. And then she comments, it was not possible to spend any time with Yamuna in her latest years and not hear her speak about the need to bring together the desire for the practice of bhakti in the younger generation of Srila Prabhupada, as he so purely gave it to all of us, full of joy and wonder. She feared that some of our own spiritual lassitude, among many other things, would generate apathy. towards the process, and therefore an inability to cultivate the urgency needed to prepare. Whether there, actually I need my bee bag because there's a lavender in it. It's a yellow bee bag. If anybody sees it, maybe in that bathroom. I feel that the best way we can honor her memory would be to use more of our collective resources, that means all of us, to discuss and expand on how we can do this in a vital, loving way, a true and endearing gift. Thank you. So in other words, that we can consider, as you hear some of these wonderful and amazing pastimes and stories about Yamuna, consider how she prepared her life upon meeting Srila Prabhupada to perfect her Krishna consciousness. It became just like we make a plan. There was a plan for this retreat. She made a plan that she would dedicate her life to service of Radha. And in doing that, she perfected her life clearly. And I wanted to read one very sweet letter from a god sister. Her name was Mandakini, and Yamuna had given her initial training, in fact practically all of her training in Krishna consciousness. She was a young girl from France, 19 years old, and she came to our mission in London. And after hearing that the saintly person would be there, so she came to meet him with two of her other friends. So she wrote, just received a mail from England, meaning that she was informed of Yamuna's departure. Still under the shock of intense and violent separation caused by Yamuna's auspicious departure, she has joined her beloved Srila Prabhupada and must be already melted by feeling of love caused by reunion after a too long separation. Must be thinking of so many artistic, loving ways to serve this in the spiritual realm. So she was sleeping with this, I forget the name of it, it puts oxygen. If you're a medical person, you'll know.
CPAP machine.
EPAC?
Is it a machine?
The CPAC thing, yeah, it's just, it doesn't cover the whole face, it just goes into the nose and it puts oxygen in. So, she put that on, she went to sleep, and around 12:30, between 12 and 12:30, Dina just checked to see if she was okay, peacefully sleeping. The next morning, she didn't wake her for Mangal Arati, she just performed Mangal Arati on her own. But then she went to check, and she saw Yamuna was lying on the bed with her hand in her bead bag. The machine was off. She was, on top of the bed. Her left hand was like this. So, and she could see, some like a smile on her face. So she went in to speak to her. But when she got there, she realized actually she had left her body. So, in that way she was found. So that's being referenced here. So, we found our jewel-like sister with her hand in the bead bag. And I would like to say, if Yamuna's hand was in the bead bag, it wasn't because her hand was cold. She was chanting. She didn't walk around. Some people will do that. Walk around with her hand in the bead bag, but it's like nothing's coming out of the mouth. Well, her hand was in the bead bag. She was chanting. So then she said, she's remembering, she's French. In French, there's a saying. Anybody here speak French? Le main dans le sac. Le main is hand, and sac, of course, the bag. It applies to a thief who is caught by the police. Le main dans le sac, the hand in the bag. And the thief is thus proved to be guilty without a doubt. So, our cunning Lord has come unexpected, and he has caught our dear Yamuna, le main dans le sac, the hand in the japa bag. Thus the proof was evident that she has been glorifying the name of Lord Krishna at her last breath, le main dans le sac, with humility and gratitude. We met a Swami who was going to marry us. And she asked Yamuna, at that time her name was Joan, her sister was Jan, and she asked, I want you to come to the wedding. So Joan was living in Portland, Oregon, And myself and my boyfriend at that point, we were living right next door. So at one point she went up to New York, and we had gone up to another place in Oregon on the top of a very tall mountain. So Yamuna was remembering, she goes, little did I know what kind of wedding it would be. All I knew was they met a Swami and received the names Mukunda and Janaki from him. When I first saw the Swami, he was sitting beneath the window in his front room. This was at the little apartment behind 26 2nd Avenue, if some of you have been there. He was bathed in sunlight, surrounded by pots of prasadam, which he was distributing to the devotees who were sitting around him. Mukunda introduced me, and the Swami offered me some prasadam. And for her, she didn't, she wasn't so impressed. She said it was not a palatable experience. Because at that time we were following a particular diet called the macrobiotic diet. And that diet was very severe. You don't take any fruit, you don't take any sugar, you don't take any white flour, you don't take practically anything. And there's different levels. So we were at the most severe level. It was called the number 7 diet, and we only ate brown rice. That was it. So, to be offered this other, food, she didn't feel it was so palatable. But she said, still, this radiant, beautiful person, he was insistent, he was eager for me to take it, so I did. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking that, I'm never ever going to come back here and have lunch with these people. And so this would be the last time. But then when the meal was finished, so the Swami put his hand in this big jar full of some kind of sugar syrup, and the sugar syrup had crystallized on the outside, in big round balls, and he picks one up, dripping, and he hands it over, and she goes, oh no, I couldn't possibly. Take. So he said, he made me take it. But when I finished that Gulajaman, I was fully convinced this would be the last time I'd ever come here. That's what she was thinking. But then, 10 days in New York, she and now Mukunda and Janaki were man and wife. And all three of them decided to come back to the West Coast. So the way they're passing through Oregon, and they came to the mountain where I was with, I was Melanie at the time, and my boyfriend's name was Sam. So they convinced us to go with them to San Francisco to open the temple. And I remember saying, what's a temple? And I remember Mukunda, it's a storefront painted white. But he showed us the beautiful Srimad Bhagavatam. And it was, this beautiful picture of Mahavishnu on the cover with Brahma coming out of his navel. It was such an amazing thing. Now you have this type of, literature from India. You can go get a Bhagavad Gita and progress if you want, but it just, you didn't have this information at that point in time in the 60s. So I remember saying, who is that? And the goodness said, that is God. And I became very impressed because, if there was a God, he had to be something different from us, and this was very amazing. So we went with them to San Francisco and arranged to get a storefront painted white, and that was in the fall of 66. Then in 67 January, Srila Prabhupada came to San Francisco, and then myself and Sam became Shamsudra, I became Malati. And Yamuna had met with a fellow named Roger, and they went for a few more weeks up Northern California. So she wasn't initially initiated in January, but in March she was initiated, and Roger became Guru Das, and Yamuna became Yamuna. Joan became Yamuna. And in his first letter to them, which was, there was a wonderful thing that in those days you could be walking with Srila Prabhupada, so she would often go on a walk. And one time she was asking him, Swamiji, do you think sometime that, you could take us to Vrindavan and show us around Vrindavan? Because we just only heard about Vrindavan. And he stopped and he turned and he said, yes, I will take you to Vrindavan one day, and I will show you around Vrindavan on foot. So Yamuna Joy said, that was the most wonderful thing I ever heard. And I was just waiting for that time to come. So of course, in between the time of getting to Vrindavan, we were all sent to London. And during the, some Sundar will talk a little about that. I'm just doing a little fast forward overview. After the London epic, the epic time in London, then we were the same group. There was a group of 7, the 7th being my little daughter, who was 6 weeks when we left, and then when we were sent to India to begin the Hare Krishna movement in India. That's why I always say to all of you, you can go out and preach to Westerners because we went to India. And just start ISKCON in India, it's like, so please don't feel shy about feeling compassion for the fallen conditioned Western body people. So then we were sent to India, and then wonderfully enough that, Yamuna and Guru Das at one point, when she was talking about being on that train, on the train, on another train, the train stopped in Delhi for a few minutes, and Prabhupada was met by a man. He got on the train, and the train was going to be there like 20 minutes. And he goes, Swamiji, please get down. People want to meet you. Some people want to meet you here. And we were on our way to Bombay to have it for a big program. So Prabhupada looks around at the devotees and he says to Guru Das and Yamuna, okay, you get down here and see if you can do something. We're on our way to Bombay for a big program. Train stops for 20 minutes and your entire life changed. And he sent 4 brahmacharis. One of those was Giriraj brahmachari at the time. So within that little train stop, the Delhi yatra, the seed of the Delhi yatra and the seed for Vrindavan were planted. So Yamuna remembers getting off the train with, we just would have one little suitcase in those days, and a bead bag and maybe a small little shoulder bag. And by Prabhupada's window making obeisances as the train just took off. And later on, they were entrusted to the center in Delhi, in Vrindavan. And Prabhupada wrote one letter to Guru Das and Yamuna saying, I believe I have put this project in the hands of the right people, namely yourself, your good wife Yamuna, and there was another devotee, Kiradakshai and Vishnu. And then there was a question that Prabhupada answered, and he said, and your question regarding women. I have never refused service from women. I've always accepted their service. So please keep that in mind. Very wonderful. So I'll take a break on this part here, and here's a remembrance from Shyam Sundar. Yamuna possesses as her most defining feature gravitas. So gravitas is an ancient Greek word, and it means deeply serious, grave, even heavy. And this gravity attracts others. Just like Guru, heavy means heavy, Guru means heavy. Attracts others by its sheer insistence on the truth. So this serious feature, she had an insistent focus on the heart of the matter, is what always drew me to Joni. He's referring to their childhood name. Always searching for the heart of things, searching for the truth. So he said, but of course, this serious feature was more than balanced by her love of fun and laughter, her lightness and her sweetness. So anybody around Yamuna could know that there was no laugh in the world except for Srila Prabhupada. She had a wonderful laugh, great laughter. So she was very grave, a very intensely serious personality, but it was balanced by her lightness and her sweetness. and her exceptional clinging to the heart of Krishna consciousness and her deep and real surrender to the lotus feet of Sri Radha and Krishna and her beloved spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. So then he recounts how we went to London, and how we were struggling to plant Srila Prabhupada's flag there. Because, a few soldiers in such a big, huge city. So he remembers how Yamuna kept us centered, insisting on group worship, sadhana. So our mission was vaguely to somehow interest the Beatles, and through them the whole world in Krishna consciousness, but we really had no clue how to do it. But Yamuna gathered us every day and made us practice, and he highlighted, practice singing the Hare Krishna mantra, the prayers to the spiritual master, and other Krishna conscious hymns, including the Brahma Samhita. And she was, this was part of our daily routine. We would chant together and we'd practice the prayers. And then, this gave us a certain courage, you could say, And it was also because when you're chanting Krishna's names, it's very attractive. So from this little effort, the Radha Krishna Temple album, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and the Govindam prayers that I wasn't able to get to play here, but we hear them every morning at the greeting of the deities. These beautiful Govindam prayers. So Yamuna never thought about the results of her service, but she only thought about the service itself. And devotional service was her most important feature, most important focus. And then he relates a wonderful story that it illuminates Yamuna's gravitas, her seriousness, and her over-abiding focus on spiritual advancement. George Harrison from the Beatles, he was really very impressed with Yamuna for these very good qualities, and also by her voice. So one day he came up and he said to her, very seriously, he said that, if you like, I can make you world famous. I can make you a star. And she said, well, that's, I'd have to think about that. She wasn't thinking for herself, but how could this maybe be used in Krishna service? And we had already, begun the work on the Krishna Temple album. So she thought it over. And she called George and she said, George, thank you so much, but I have to say no to your kind offer, because such a life would very much hinder and damage my spiritual advancement. Yeah. I mean, literally, she was saying goodbye to, fame and fortune in favor of Krishna, who's the most famous and can make anyone fortunate. So from that time to the present, as Shisham consider, Yamuna's Krishna conscious example passed to the realm of mentorship. Increasingly, she became a role model for an unlimited number of devotees, in particular the youth. And he writes, for me personally, just knowing Yamuna existed, knowing that unconditional love for Prabhupada and Krishna was alive in a person much like myself, keeps me wandering back to the straight and narrow, and keeps me focused on the real possibility that in some one faraway day I may attain a fraction of Yamuna's transcendental loving achievement. And he felt a great debt, just like when somebody gives you something valuable, you feel a debt to that person. And he gave her Krishna consciousness. And he always wanted to do something for her. But it seemed like, what could you do for such a personality? But one day he was in New York and received a phone call. And she said, this is Yamuna. And he was immediately, this is wonderful. And she had heard he was doing publishing. And she told him, I've been working for 10 years on a cookbook. Actually, it was longer than that, but 10 years. And it's ready. Could you help me publish it? Immediately he said, yes. So within 3 days, there was a UPS type of thing, like a FedEx van. He looks out his window and this van is loading, starting to unload boxes and boxes. And he didn't know what it was. And it came up and rang his doorbell. Here was the raw manuscript for Lord Krishna's cuisine. And he realized, he was thinking of cookbook. This is like, and it was just like, he said, I couldn't do this alone. So he called one good friend of his who also had an appreciation for Yamuna. And he asked, can you help? For a lot of Priyas, and immediately agreed. So it takes a lot to get a book ready, to get it formatted, to get it just, everything together. So that was, and he had just gotten married. Yogeshwar had just gotten married and just gotten a new job. Now he gets this, project, and he realized this project in itself is going to be a marriage and a full-time job. So, his mind was, where do you go with this? And there's only one way to go, and that's forward. So, job on the back burner, and they started getting this ready. So it took them about 2 years of production of the book, and then they start sending out, to the big publishing firms. And one after another, they got these letters, very nice, appreciative letters back. Wonderful, this is magnificent. Good luck, I don't think we can do it. Too much, everyone, nobody, they were all like that. Great job, but we can't do it. So finally, they approached 30 to 35 publishers. I mean, this story in itself could be a book. And then one of them, they said, well, maybe if you abridge it. So he went to Yamuna, do you think we could abridge it, shorten it? And she goes, absolutely not. If something's worth doing, then you do it right. Why bother? She had complete conviction. So because of that, they had complete conviction. So what they did, they took their own finances, and with another person who won't remain unnamed, but this person gave, and they went to a big publisher and they said, look, you publish, but we'll take care of the finances, we'll take care of all the, it's already set, ready to go, we'll do all the work, you just publish it. We'll distribute it, and if there's any leftover copies and they're not sold, we'll buy them back. It was an offer they couldn't refuse. So it was Simon & Schuster, big publisher. I don't know if they're still big publishers, but they were big. So the book came out. It was in 86 it came out. And amazingly, it was getting noticed. I mean, this huge, fat book of vegetarian Indian cooking full of this devotional purpose, you can say, and beautiful illustrations. And, it was getting noticed. And then they get a letter that this it's called the International Association of Cooking Professionals. It is the most prestigious, group of big shot, internationally well-known cooks, and every year they have a sangha where they get together and they choose the best books and blah, 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 and they give all these awards out. And they got invited. And there was Julia Childs, she's dead now, but she was a big one, and, James Beard, if you're a cook, you would know these names. So they're there, and here comes Yamuna and Yogeshwar and Prabhata Priya. Sit down at a table, in a big Park Avenue hotel in New York City. And so they come, the first one was the Asian Cuisine Award of the Year. So the lady's was announcing it. Well, we've got a surprise here for you. The best book, Asian Cuisine Book of the Year is Lord Krishna's Cuisine. And they went, I know. She was had been trained as a ballerina in her youth, and she could sometimes walk in a very wonderful way. So she, in her wonderful way, walked up and took the award, thanked them, and then they were like, wow, my God, just that it finally got published, and now this, So all the other awards, now we're going to get the best all-over cookbook of the year. And the ladies open, well, we have another surprise. It's Lord Krishna's Cuisine. This is huge. This is the Academy Award of cookbooks. So Yamuna said, she said it was a blur after that. She went up, she got, but because they couldn't even, they were just wanting to please Prabhupada. This was just
So she says, all I remember that night is, like our in Yogeshwar was said, all I remember that night is running down Park Avenue with Yamuna and Prahlada Priya. They're whirling and twirling and Gauranga Haribo, Gauranga Haribo. You know, she didn't take it. I mean, you can't imagine when I say she didn't take it, she'd done it. When you perform a service and you offer to Krishna, it becomes his. It's not yours anymore. And she's fully in that consciousness. And they give you this really fancy, like, it's like a trophy memo when you get this award. You know, it's your cookbook, but they've had it done in a really, like, way, in a big case. And so she, actually, she signed that and she gave it to Prahlada Priya. I mean, that's like giving away your, you know, your Academy Award, you know, just because she felt, you did it, you know, you got this done. And so just that she was unattached to the results in terms of her own role. I've done the service, I've offered it, now it's Krishna's. So that was a really glorious, very glorious situation. And then the next one I'll quickly read off is, this is going back a little bit to, I have the notes here, to the Krishna, because I have to kind of skip things here. To the London time. It was very potent, very powerful in London. You know, literally, just like the leaves fall off the trees in the fall when there's a wind, it was like that in London. Devotees were just falling at our doorstep. There would be a knock on the door and there would be somebody saying, I want to join you. And literally. Or we'd go out in Harinam and 2 or 3 people would come back and they said, do you want to move in? It was just happening like that. So there's one devotee who's, now he's also a member of the GBC body. His name is Hari Vilas. And maybe if you've ever seen these Uncle Harry products, they're tooth products and different types of products, tooth cream and what else? There's some scented oils and different soaps and stuff. Uncle Harry's, that's him. So he was in Paris. He was an American, but he was in Paris, and they had this American center there. So the devotees had approached him. He was running part of that place, and he said, we'd like to come and do some programs here. And they explained it would be some bhakti yoga meditation. And he said, oh, that sounds good, okay. And then he said he was really impressed when the devotees showed up. First thing they did was totally clean the room out that they had given, you know, just scrubbed it clean, and they put up a little table with a picture and some incense, and he was kind of impressed, you know, by this. And he stood out, he said, he was sitting outside, he said we had to charge, and the devotee said, but we don't want to charge anything. He said, well, I have to because I have to pay for this. So they said, okay, you can deal with that, but we're just going to do the chanting. So he stood outside, and the chanting was going inside. And he said he wanted to be there with, you know, really liked the chanting. So they were coming weekly, so more and more he was starting to spend time with the chanting. And then the devotees said that their guru was coming to London, and they invited the other people, you can come with us and you can meet Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, you can meet him. And so quite a few of the members went. So that was like one bikini, whose letter I read earlier, 2 other young girls, and Yogeshwara. He was Josh at the time. So they asked to Hari Vilas, his name was Harry, would you like to come with us? And then he goes, no, not. I like the chanting, but you know, I'm not. So they went to London, and then the first one to come back was Yogeshwara, and Hari Vilas relates how he was so changed. I mean, he'd been this skinny 19-year-old street-and-beaten kind of clueless kid, and he came back, and it was like he was a different person. And he said he was just so attractive and so radiant after this visit to meet the guru, that he said he became jealous, and he decided, I have to go to London too. So he went, immediately he went to London, and he came to our little temple on Bury Place, and there was opening and nobody was around because it was in the daytime, so everybody was out in Harinam, except for one person who was in the temple room doing something on the altar, and that was Yamuna. And he was watching, and he said it was like a beautiful, radiant being, like an angel. he didn't really understand what she was doing. There was the deities and she was doing something. And then after the offering, she'd come and like there was a fire. She'd offer him the fire, and the different items. The flour through some water, and he remembers being sprinkled with the water. And he was just kind of really amazed with her, what was going on. And then afterwards, after the arti was finished, just went up and greeted him personally, and he was remembering how she spoke to him as if she'd known him her entire life. It just made her feel immediately, part of what was going on, although he just walked into the door. So the next day, and he said, I immediately felt blessed to meet such an elevated person. So she says, the next day, he's still there, and she goes, tomorrow George Harrison is coming to lunch, would you like to join us? And he goes, George who? And she goes, George Harrison. He goes, the Beatles? And she goes, yeah, and he was like, so, yeah, I would like to come. So he's there. And he had a little instrument called like a lute. And it was an Arabic lute. So he comes to lunch, and George walks in with his guitar, and he could just see how the devotees were so much, they were, like George was a friend. We're not like George Harrison, we had Prabhupada, and our interest was to introduce George to Krishna consciousness, So we were treating him certainly respectfully, but not like, we weren't a groupie, we weren't screaming and fainting in the streets like other people were. And so then he says, Yamuna, I just worked on some chords, and he asked her to sing along. And then he saw that Hari Vilas had, Harry had this little instrument, so can you play this riff? And he made us down. He goes, yeah, I can do that. So then they did it, and this was actually the first kind of trial for the Govindam. And then when they went to the recording, he said, you come too, you play, and he had him play. So here he was, this clueless kid from, America who was in Paris, just doing some mundane thing, and suddenly, pushed into the forefront of the beginning of the Hare Krishna movement in London. And, by the time that whole period was over and the chanting, and he didn't go back he went back to Paris, but to start, to get a temple started, to help with the temple, and all of his other mundane activities were finished. So that was, the influence of meeting surrendered soul like Yamuna. And then I'm going to just skip here and Yamuna's sister, who I mentioned briefly, who became Janaki. Janaki had a really very sweetly personal and amazing relationship with Srila Prabhupada, and I don't have time to go and follow that there, but Prabhupada referred to her as my naughty daughter. And I had so much love and affection. There's a famous picture at the airport where you see Prabhupada looking like, she's standing with something in her hand behind her like this, and Mukunda's like looking. She went behind him and she grabbed his ticket, and she goes, now you can't leave. And in those days we didn't have e-tickets, so that ticket was the ticket. And he never knew what Janaki was going to do. She might just tear it up, So Prabhupada's kind of looking at Mukunda like, what's going to do something with your wife? At one time, Prabhupada wrote this letter to Yamuna, and then at the end, he said in the letter, he wrote in hand, first in the letter, because how is my naughty daughter? And then another letter he wrote by hand, in a letter it was a letter to Yamuna, but he wrote a little note to Janaki, because, if I may say, your sister is slightly better than you, but you are my affectionate daughter. Anyway, my dear friends, she couldn't come to one of the memorials, so she'd written a note. My dear friends, please hold on to my gratitude and love for all that you are and all that you do, and continue to honor Yamuna. I must tell you, it has been and continues to be very difficult not to physically hold Yamuna's beautiful hand and to look one more time at her exquisite glow. I know that her wondrous life on this planet was temporary, but having said that, her soul, her spirit was so focused, was so clear, and so incredibly in love with Krishna, Radharani Prabhupada, and scores and multitudes of devotees from 9 to 90. In some ways, she was a very private. In some ways, she was a multiple personality. For Yamuna was a very private person in the human aspect of her bodily condition, but in the journey of spirituality, she was both a blazing light, a beacon of whose only importance was to fill her being with her spiritual master's teachings and his spiritual master's teachings, so that the disciplic succession and learning were so beautifully pure. From the moment she entered Prabhupada's apartment on 26 Second Avenue, introductions were made. Prabhupada said, "Oh, your sister has come to the wedding. So, can she cook? Yes? All right, she can assist me." So right away, she was engaged immediately by Srila Prabhupada. For a woman who was quite disciplined in her actions and emotions to fall into his charm so quickly must have been preordained. Anyway, my personal consolation is that in the month while in Florida, I was able to call her weekly or more. She was so energized, so encouraged, and it seemed that the wellness of her body was getting well. And for the first time in decades, she called me by my childhood name. But this was an important thing, because when they became devotees, at a certain point, Yamuna had, become more like a god sister. So she was her sister and god sister. But Janaki still wanted that sisterly affection. So for the first time in decades, she called me by a childhood name. And you want to know what that name was? It was Baziweligi Magusnarsh. So this was just, shortly before. And sometimes Janaki, sometimes sister, sometimes John. What was so glorious was her sense of humor. We could go into fits of laughter so the tears were running down our legs. I believe her laughter has moved into an eternal state of celestial joy. And no doubt, she still travels with her knives and pots and spices. So, just one, this is really, really brief. When Luna was talking about the life story, she mentioned Kausalya. And Kausalya joined as a young girl in Hawaii, 17 years old, and she came to India. She was not, she was still around 17. And Yamuna gave her so much shelter and was really protective of her. The one time we went to the Kumbha Mela with Srila Prabhupada, and there was one day when all the nectar would go into the Trivedi. So if you went, the nectar from the demigods would fall into the Trivedi. And if you would bathe early in the morning on that day, you could get unlimited spiritual bliss and advancement, etc. So they were determined they were going to get into the Trivedi that morning before the 1 million other people did. So they got up really early, like 1:30 or 2 in the morning, and they went to the river. And it was freezing cold. I have to tell you, I was there. It was freezing cold. It was like taking a bath was an austerity you had to force yourself to do, like anything. But they went down to the river. It was still so early, not, a few people there. And they were blissfully chanting the prayers to the spiritual masters and the Maha Mantra. And suddenly they heard a noise and they looked up. And coming down the embankment was a whole phalanx of hundreds of Nagababas. Now, Nagababas are Shiva worshippers, and they don't wear clothes. And have big hair up on their head and tridents. And here they are, coming right down to the spot where these two girls were.
Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam
Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Enam Kanvandam Aravindanalayatacham Bharavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandat ako ikamaniya Vishesha Shobha
Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami
Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami Andani Yasa Sakalem Priya Priti Manti Pasyan Dipan Dikayan